These emergency responders are just completing their work in a hazardous materials release. No doubt they feel relieved to be leaving the high-risk area. But what they may be forgetting is that they aren't completely safe yet. Without proper decontamination, the hazardous materials they were working with could damage their health even after they leave the release site. It might even kill them. Decontamination, or Decon for short, means removing or neutralizing hazardous contaminants from personnel and equipment. Decontamination has two basic purposes. It limits exposure by reducing the time people and equipment are in contact with hazardous materials, and it minimizes the chance that contaminants will be carried out of the release area. This program will focus on the technical decontamination of personnel. It will cover various decontamination methods, preparation for decon, the steps in a decon procedure, and emergency decontamination of injured workers. There are many methods of decontamination. Hazardous materials can be removed physically by scrubbing, scraping, or brushing them off, diluting them with water, or absorbing them. Other physical decon methods include vacuuming, using an autoclave for infectious materials, and using pressurized water jets on heavy equipment. However, many of these methods are not suitable for use on people. Harmful materials can also be removed chemically by neutralizing them, degrading them to make them less harmful, or sterilizing infectious contaminants with a disinfectant. Some methods combine physical and chemical decon. For example, a multi-step scrub with a detergent solution attacks the contaminant chemically, and it also dilutes it and washes it away. The decon officer is responsible for deciding which decon method should be used. His decision will be based on the physical and chemical characteristics of the hazardous material. The decon method chosen must be safe and effective. Another decision the decon officer makes is how extensive the procedure will be. This depends mainly on the type of contaminant and the degree of exposure. In low-risk situations, a simple washdown, scrubbing, or change of clothing may be enough. Generally, the higher the risk, the more decon steps are needed. Two rules should be kept in mind when deciding how much decon is necessary. Always prepare for the worst, and if in doubt, decon. Consider everybody contaminated until proven otherwise. Before the decon station is set up, the incident commander will divide the hazardous material site into hot, warm, and cold zones. The area of greatest contamination is the hot zone. Just outside this zone is an area of reduced risk, the warm zone. Beyond that is the cold zone, where exposure is unlikely. The decon station must be set up before anyone enters the hot zone. The station begins in the hot zone, crosses the warm zone, and leads to the cold zone. It should be marked off with brightly colored tape. This reminds everyone that once you enter the hot zone, the decon station is the only way out. Periodically, it is necessary for a designated team member to monitor the air in the decontamination area for possible contaminants. The station should be uphill from the hot zone so that rain and runoff will drain toward the release site. The decon station should be in a flat, open area. It needs to be near the water supply and other vital services, and it should have easy access for emergency medical units. One of the most important factors in site selection is that the decon station be upwind from the hot zone. Determine the wind's likely direction throughout the operation by getting an updated weather report from the nearest airport. In setting up the station, remember that each stage of the decon process is conducted in its own area. These areas must be separated from each other and clearly marked off. This prevents cross-contamination or having contaminants pass from one area of the station to the next. Before anyone enters the hot zone, all equipment and members of the decon team should be ready and in their proper place. The entry officer will ensure that each team member has the correct personal protective equipment, depending on the type of contaminant. Normally, decon workers at the beginning of the line wear protection equal to the entry team. Decon workers located farther down the line may be safe with less protection. Each person involved must understand the entire decontamination procedure. Before entry into the hot zone, there should be a thorough briefing of all decon workers and the entry team. Also at this point, a medical team monitors the vital signs of both the decon and the entry team. Decontamination has certain steps which must be performed in the correct order. Here are some steps commonly used in a technical decontamination procedure. The highest concentration of contaminants will accumulate on tools, outer gloves, boot covers, and outer suits. For this reason, the tool drop is in the hot zone, and it is unassisted. The entry team places all tools carried into the hot zone in a containment drum for further cleanup or disposal. Some decon systems also call for boot covers and outer gloves to be discarded at this point. The boot covers are peeled off first, followed by the outer gloves. If an entry member is wearing a disposable oversuit, then a disposal or dry decon method can be used. The oversuit catches the heaviest contamination. It is worn over the more expensive Level A suit. When the entry team reach the tool drop area, they assist each other in removing and disposing of first their outer gloves and then the disposable oversuit. Before reusing a Level A suit, be sure it has been cleaned and tested. During gross decon, as much contaminant is removed as possible. This is usually done by physical means such as scraping, brushing, or deluge showering. Watch the splashes here. Make sure all water is contained, since the runoff at this point is probably contaminated. Protected decon workers should be standing by to provide help and guidance to the entry team if it is needed. At this stage, the decon team starts to assist the entry team. Often chemical solutions may be used to neutralize the contaminant. It is also where the decon station crosses from the hot zone to the warm zone. During the wash, quickly wet each person with a low-pressure hose. The idea is just to moisten the suit, so you don't need a steady flow. Use soft scrub brushes to apply the premixed solution. Remember, work quickly and thoroughly. Scrub the entire person, including between the legs, face plates, flaps, seams, boot bottoms, underarms, and dump valve areas. Thoroughness is vital because contaminants can work their way into clothing and PPE. This can occur through penetration, degradation, and permeation. Penetration is when contaminants enter clothing through natural openings such as zippers and stitching. Degradation occurs when contaminants chemically eat through clothing and PPE. And permeation is when contaminants migrate or seep into clothing and PPE. When you get to the wash stage, scrub hard. When you're finished scrubbing, step into the rinse pool and rinse off all the neutralizing chemicals. For the rinse, use clean water and lots of it. Depending on the contaminant and the extent of exposure, there may be a series of washes, perhaps using different solutions. A rinse will follow each wash. Periodically, it is necessary to check the pH and contaminant levels of each rinse pool. Be careful not to let any of the pools overflow. Control all runoff water by using a hand pump to transfer the runoff into compatible overpack drums. If the entry team must return to the hot zone, air cylinders or air purifying cartridges should be replaced at this step. The next two steps are the removal of the outer layer of protective clothing and the breathing apparatus. Which one comes off first depends on the level of PPE being used, the design of the clothing, and your team's standard operating procedure. Whichever procedure is chosen, there will be some basic principles followed. The decon team helps remove the protective clothing. The proper technique is to peel out of the clothing, turning it inside out. This minimizes the potential for contact with the contaminant. When the self-contained breathing apparatus, or SCBA, is removed, the hose can be disconnected from the regulator valve so that the person can keep wearing the facepiece. In a level B suit, when the air hose is disconnected, it should be held high and away from the suit to avoid possible contamination. In another method, the SCBA is removed before the outer clothing, but only the backpack should be taken off. The entry member remains on air, and a decon worker holds the backpack while the outer clothing is removed. Regardless of the method, the facepiece and inner gloves are always the last two pieces of PPE removed. It is safest to remove the inner gloves last to prevent any contaminants from contacting your skin. The remaining steps can be done in the warm or cold zone, depending on the contaminant released. If the inner clothing is removed in the warm zone, a makeshift barrier can be erected to protect the entrant's privacy. But do not delay if the barrier is not set up. The inner clothing is then placed in a labeled plastic bag for later testing and possible disposal. When showering, whether in the warm or cold zone, use lots of soap and lukewarm water. Dry off and get dressed in clean clothing. At this stage, after proper decontamination, a medical team will monitor all participating personnel before they leave the release site. A medical team will provide a thorough examination. The medics will monitor your vital signs and give you something to drink to restore bodily fluids. If further treatment is needed, medical monitoring can be done en route to a medical facility. Each entrant's involvement in the incident will be documented. The type of contaminant, level and time of exposure, and level of protection used will be recorded. This information is kept in the incident report and the individual's permanent medical file. After the entrants are properly deconned, the decon personnel must also be decontaminated. However, they start the decon process at their assigned stations in the decon line. Other termination procedures include collecting and testing all runoff water and making sure that it is in the proper containers for disposal. All contaminated articles must be collected for further decon or disposal. This includes clothing, PPE, other entry team equipment, and the equipment used in decon. Place these items in approved overpack drums. Decontaminating injured workers can be tricky. Immediate emergency decon is necessary if the victim is showing signs and symptoms of acute chemical exposure. First, protect yourself with the necessary PPE. Then, decon the person as quickly and thoroughly as you can without interfering with life-saving measures. This emergency decon will usually consist of a quick wash, clothing removal, and another quick wash, followed by the proper evacuation. When calling for evacuation, tell the medical personnel of the incident and the nature of the injury. Report the chemical name of the contaminant and the decon procedures that have been used. If the injury is not life-threatening, then technical decontamination can be performed. Effective decontamination is vital for the protection of people, property, and the environment. You must become thoroughly familiar with what decon is and what its purposes are. Develop an understanding of decon methods, how to prepare for decon, and each step in the process. And be ready to follow those steps exactly under any conditions. Decontamination. It's a matter of life.